Tell me, Ivan Alexeyevich, is there any other way to get to your site, bypassing the checkpoint? Yes, and so that the soldiers wouldn't see, Lena became an investigator again and tried to find a solution to the task she had set herself 6 months ago. Ivan thought for no more than a minute, smiled condescendingly, and replied in a kind of dashing, hussar-like manner. Then he looked appraisingly at the unexpected guest's clothes, Lena's light blouse, and Max's car, and added, "You need to change. I mean, something low-key. And we'll go in my car." Lena spread her hands helplessly. "But we don't have anything with us." "Well, there are sneakers with jeans. The most important thing. And the rest." Ivan waved his hand nonchalantly, as if to declare, "Never mind." Medvedev asked to stop by home to warn his wife about his departure. The hour and a half he had planned for a conversation with unknown guests had already expired, and his wife was waiting for him. Ivan did not risk upsetting her with a longer delay without warning. Then they drove to the garage where the owner kept his beloved Hyundai. On the outskirts of the village, on the border with one of the sections of the mine, an entire city was built for iron horses, with its own streets, alleys and even squares. Here they were stored, repaired, washed, decorated. In short, they made the life of their faithful friends comfortable and pleasant. The first 3 streets, when the construction of this capital city was just beginning. The owners of garages under construction tried to comply with the standards required by architecture. The area was no more than 6 by 4, the height was 2.5, the gate width was 240. But then, when the dashing 90s came, and architecture was no longer up to observing the rule of law in construction, they began to build who knows what. Someone combined 2 garages into one, blocking the wide spans with scarce mine 30 rails, which were surprisingly easy to get at that time due to the mines being completely closed. Someone increased the height of their penthouse by 1.5 times, adjusting it to the height of their iron cargo horse. Someone opened a repair shop in the built-up box, someone a car wash, and someone just lived there. Yes, indeed, Ivan said that in front of his garage, in exactly the same one, an unassuming peasant has been living for the 2nd year, who has a TV, a refrigerator and even a microwave in the garage. Moreover, this guy is not an alcoholic, not a homeless man, but an ordinary calm pensioner. Something went wrong in the family, so he shows his character. There's another one like it somewhere on the next street. So he has a whole library in the garage, gives the neighbors books to read. There is even an unspoken competition among the hermits to see who can better equip their home. Vanya Medvedev's garage was standard, 6 by 4, without any bells and whistles. Concrete floor, cellar, LED lights, small workbench at the entrance. There was no stove. But the entire back wall was occupied by shelves covered with canvas curtains, heavy but durable. When Ivan kicked out his Hyundai, he began rummaging through the things on these shelves and, in his opinion, threw the necessary equipment for the upcoming voyage into the trunk. Among other things, there was a decent piece of camouflage netting that looked like a withered but still green reed, a coil of rope of indeterminate color, resembling a climbing rope, but slightly thicker, powerful binoculars in a case and 2 camouflage jackets, not new, but clean and well-groomed. Max realized that this was for him and Lena. Weaving between small birch groves along field roads, and sometimes ignoring them, the newly minted scouts gradually approached the dump visible in the distance. Ivan drove the car quite confidently, but for Lena and Maxim, the road was from the category of the devil will break your leg. It was difficult to say how they rode. Sometimes it seemed that they had already passed through these places. Here is a completely typical spoon. It was passed 5 minutes ago, but the birches tilted in the same way as those that were passed 3 minutes ago. It's very similar. After half an hour of wandering through fields and woods, they suddenly found themselves at the very wall of the dump, which soared almost vertically up to 30 meters. This dump has not been used for a long time. Its outer side is overgrown with sea buckthorn bushes, young birches and individual tufts of coarse grass, alternating with stone bald spots. Not reclamation, but something like nature itself has done its best. Vanya drove the car under the spreading birch trees that grew next to the dump. Holding out the jackets, which, as Maxim had assumed, were intended specifically for them, he stated, "You'll stay here for now, and I'll climb up, figure out what and how. If everything is in order, no one will be there. I'll give you a sign, then get up." "What is this place? How far is it from here to the 3rd? He seemed to have completely lost his bearings due to the long, winding road. Ivan answered without hesitation, "Not really. This is the reverse side of the site. No stripping work has been carried out here for several years. You'll be able to see everything through binoculars. And the ship itself, too." He paused and decided to entertain the guys a little. "In the 2000th we worked here and along this wall." Ivan nodded at the dump. We lowered diesel fuel drained in cans on ropes, traded. He smiled at his memories, rocking in his hand the very rope that he took in the garage. It was a difficult time. The balance, damn it, instead of a salary. And many children study for a fee, loans. And how can you live without money? He began to speak with resentment. So we hunted until the new director of the incision figured out everything and slammed it. Someone was even kicked out. It's a good thing that the case wasn't referred to the police. And then everything gradually got better. Vanya smiled again and, taking binoculars, a camouflage net and a rope, which he threw into a small backpack without looking, headed for the natural climbing wall. Half an hour later, the whole company was lying on the edge of the dump among low bushes covered with a net, and they took turns examining the wall of the site with the gleaming side of the alien ship through binoculars. Now the brilliance seemed brighter than in the video posted online, perhaps because of the sunlight flooding the entire basin from the sun directly overhead. Climbing a steep obstacle was quite easy for Max and Lena, which cannot be said about the pioneer Ivan. Loaded with equipment, he climbed up with difficulty, looked around and dropped a rope proven in criminal exploits. With her help, pushing and pulling themselves up, they, having no climbing experience, climbed twice as fast as Vanya, after which he pulled up a rescue rope tied to a tree trunk and, without untying it, threw it there in case of emergency evacuation. His head was working. Everything was clearly visible through the binoculars. It was possible to see the ship itself with a clear line of portholes, and the edge of the collapsed dump, in the depths of which several collapsible frame military tents were already located. If Maxim and Ivan looked at the ship more, exchanging meaningless questions without answers, Lena studied the military camp more. It's only been a day, or maybe a little more, and the third service is already here, and it seems to have settled in for a long time. The layer of earth above the ship is definitely more than 20 meters. Its length and width are unknown. To dig out in order to get full information and the opportunity to get inside, it is necessary even wider than the ship itself. It is unlikely that they will dump the rock down the dump. The site is a working site, one of the most productive in the section. It means that she will be taken out, as before. This is the time. And will they entrust it to the workers from the mine? Unlikely. Then all this nonsense about creating secrecy is completely useless, even if you take 3 non-disclosure agreements. Most likely, they will bring military construction workers. It's time again. And the equipment? Razrazovskaya or own. How will the incision give the equipment to no one knows who? Although the military, especially such ones, will have levers of influence. They can also give it away, for rent. But while they're sorting it out, it's time again. It is difficult to even guess how much it will take to excavate and get a ship of unknown size at your disposal. Lena quickly turned it all over in her head, but something still confused her. Perhaps a small number of guards. It was just a checkpoint, which the observers could not see from the bushes, but here at the edge of the side above the ship, she saw another post in the form of a mobile patrol of 2 soldiers circling the territory far from the edge of the dump with the ship's side protruding outward. It cannot be that the NTS has not used technical means to protect such an important facility. That's their thing. Maybe it just hasn't been long. Lena had no time to come to such conclusions, as she realized that she was deeply mistaken, and that they were lying here and looking directly at the protected object, just a matter of chance and incredible luck. At first, a quadcopter appeared in a small spot from behind one of the tents, and only a little later the guys heard the noise of a flying drone, sharp, itchy, reminiscent of the noise of a giant bumblebee prowling through the flowers. The soldiers of the guard froze in place and simultaneously looked up. Having soared 20 meters, the drone flew along the perimeter of the site and soon had to be right above the waiting alien hunters in ambush. Lena instantly forgot her own performance in the park, when she allegedly caused Ivan a headache. Mac. As if fearing that she would be heard, she whispered quickly, listing requests completely incomprehensible to Ivan. Protection measure. Try to reach the operator, distract him, let him run into the bushes. Or something else. Maybe he'll see us. She finished with some panic in her voice. Ivan, who did not understand even half of her speech and completely ignored the discrepancy, calmly explained. Don't worry, it's unlikely that he meant the cameraman, will be able to see us under the grid. And the car is hidden under the birches. The rope doesn't catch the eye either. And it is unlikely that he will consciously look for something outside the perimeter. There didn't seem to be any reason. And his perimeter seems to be just the edge of the plot. So, it's okay for now. Lena, who had already managed to pull herself together by that moment, was surprised to think of her partner's foresight. How could he have known that he would need a camouflage net? He left a rope for insurance, and in general. And then she was glad how lucky they were to have Ivan Alexeyevich with them. While Ivan calmed Lena, Maxim tried to focus on the task set by his wife. Of course, the distance to the tents, where the drone operator was most likely, was considerable, and Maxim did not see the owner of the drone. Nevertheless, he frantically tried to send an invisible potential enemy over the fence, as once happened to the traffic police inspector. It was impossible to assess whether it was a success or not. The quadcopter calmly flew almost over them and just as calmly departed. There was no movement or commotion near the tents. A few minutes later, the guys saw that the flying scout had calmly landed behind one of the tents and the nasty buzzing immediately subsided. It was time to sneak out of the ambush and escape unnoticed, but Lena decided to test Max's capabilities once again. Max, try to work with some of the soldiers you see. You still need to know what to expect in case of something. Max tried, but his efforts proved fruitless. None of the soldiers, who had just converged at the edge of the side, reacted in any way to Maxim's attempts to send them over the fence. Probably, the distance to them was too great and all attempts to check the measure of protection ended in nothing. Lena and Max went down, holding onto the rope, and got to the car pretty quickly. Ivan descended without her help slowly, carefully, choosing a place to put his foot so as not to slip and roll, which was quite likely. Like a rabbit, it was easier for him to climb a mountain than to descend. Somewhere in the middle of the slope, he paused, took out binoculars and began to look at something in the direction from where they had come, but after a couple of seconds he literally slid down. "We have visitors," he shouted as he ran. "It looks like soldiers. We're leaving." Why he decided that was unclear, but there was no time to speculate. The guys, having gathered themselves as much as possible, jumped into the salon. Ivan threw his backpack into the trunk, took something out of the glove compartment at the last moment and disappeared behind the car again for a moment. The Hyundai took off and dusted down the road, picking up speed. But the military jeep that appeared in the distance was in no way inferior to him and, howling with effort, even caught up with him. The distance between the cars was gradually decreasing. "Max," Lena said evenly and at the same time sternly, "we can't let Ivan Alexeyevich show up. A protective measure is needed." Ivan got goosebumps from that voice. He heard for the second time about unknown measures that he couldn't think of an explanation for, and Lena was already addressing him from the back seat. "Slow down, just not very abruptly, imperceptibly, let them think that they caught up with us themselves," and reassuringly added it. "Everything will be fine. If they catch up with us, they'll see the license plate, and everything will be in vain," Maxim suggested questioningly and added something completely incomprehensible to Ivan. "Don't kill them." Without really delving into Max's last words, Ivan Alexeyevich spoke up and simply killed Lena with the words. "I covered the room with a medical cap, well, like this. With an elastic band. Chinese. They won't see anything. Checked?" And began to slow down. "That's a partner? He'll also give Lena herself a head start." She was closely monitoring the actions of the soldiers in the jeep that was catching up. And there was no doubt that it was them. Through the swirling dust covering everything with a huge brown blanket, she nevertheless saw a soldier with a submachine gun in his hands leaning out of the open window almost to his waist and, it seemed, was seriously going to shoot at their car. In any case, the machine gun in his hands was looking directly at Medvedev's Hyundai. Lena felt uncomfortable, but she still couldn't believe it. How? How did they figure it out? Yes, the investigator underestimated the third service. These are not the people to catch flies and make jokes. And she shouldn't have calmed down when the drone flew over them without stopping. When outwardly everything was calm. The sly ones. What if we had stayed on the mountain for another 5 minutes? They would have landed right in the clutches of the FSB. She tried to speak calmly, but her voice was literally ringing. "Max, we have a problem. Come on." Maxim, like the soldier in the jeep, rolled down the window in the door and leaned out almost to his waist. A burst of automatic fire immediately sounded, from which Max instinctively ducked his head into his shoulders, but did not hide. The soldier fired upward. "So far, they're just scaring. What's next?" "Ivan," Max shouted to Medvedev, "slow down." Vanya, realizing that it was impossible to brake abruptly, otherwise Max would be hard-pressed against the edge of the door, began to slow down, slowing down. There were already 20 meters between the cars. One could even see how a soldier with a machine gun in his hands smiled and lowered it. They understood who they were dealing with. But Ivan did not understand what happened next, although he saw everything clearly in the side mirror, despite the dust settling. The smiling soldier, who had calmed down, suddenly turned pale. How Ivan saw it, he did not understand, but the soldier turned pale, Ivan was sure of that, dropped the machine gun and leaned out even more, either trying to get the machine gun or... The next second, Ivan saw how the soldier vomited like a real fountain, which was repeated again. And again. The Jeep braked sharply and the poor guy, white as a sheet, was shaken so that he almost fell out of the window, then somehow hung powerlessly on his armpits, still trying to hold his head. A driver in camouflage jumped out the door, the same soldier, but without a machine gun, and rushed not at all to a colleague in trouble or to them, according to the pursuers, criminals, but to the bushes covering one side of the road. What for? Hide? Medvedev's mind was in such a mess that he couldn't even imagine how to explain it all. Let's go, Ivan Alexeyevich. We have 10 minutes now. Lena said calmly, as if nothing had happened, as if it wasn't them or almost them who had just been shot at by the guards of other people's secrets who were catching up with them. They didn't have those 10 minutes. And they soon became convinced of this. It was necessary to get out of this ruthlessly dusting field road as quickly as possible. A column of thick dust billowing behind the car chased them everywhere and easily gave away their location. Sometimes it fell off when the road wound between small villages and there was very little dust here. Ivan, who did not take his eyes off the road, squeezed everything possible out of his Hyundai and spoke through his teeth. Nothing. We'll get out on the gravel in about 5 minutes, there's less dust there. And there it's not far to the asphalt. Let's get lost. Maxim was thinking about something else entirely. Len, do you think they can track us via satellite? Well, do you remember the movie Destroy the 30th? A truck burns down, a helicopter smokes nearby, a military jeep goes into the sands. Lena, thinking about something of her own, answered after a short pause. It's unlikely. The soldiers of the various services there have been coordinating this issue for a long time. There are also 2 different offices here, the FSB and the VKS. Does it take the same amount of time, and we'll be on the highway in 10 minutes? Isn't that right, Ivan Alexeyevich? She turned to the driver with hope in her voice. Ivan stared intently into the side mirror, in which he had already seen a lot of interesting things today, and somehow vaguely said, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure anymore. It looks like we have visitors again. He declared loudly and stared at the road again, trying to increase the speed of the Hyundai, which was already practically flying off-road. Lena instantly turned around and tried to examine the pursuer through the dusty rear window. Maxim reacted more calmly. He sat up, sighed heavily and reached for the window release button. They were again being chased by the same military jeep, which the driver didn't seem to regret at all. The jeep flew without taking apart the road, cut corners, flew straight through the grass and the distance between the cars gradually decreased. That's a freak, Elena hissed in angry despair. Did he leave the soldiers? Most likely. Who is he? Max asked in disbelief, having not had time to roll down the window in the door. Officer, who else? The wife replied. Do you think they sent 2 soldiers to detain them, and that's it? They're resting on the road right now. And this is their commander, an officer, probably driving. If he doesn't complete the task, he will have problems. So he's trying. Although, to be honest, he's right. The order must be obeyed at all costs. Then she waved her hand wearily. Come on, Max. Maxim did not have time to roll down the window and lean out to apply the protection measure once more, as Ivan somehow instantly ducked, swerved the steering wheel and the car lurched to the side, causing Lena and Maxim to almost hit the walls of the cabin. Following that, the sound of a single shot rang out. He's firing a pistol, Ivan stated. Are we stopping? Yes, the couple said in one voice, after which Max nevertheless opened the window and leaned out. Ivan slowed down and suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. Well, that's it. I've left. He was looking at the side mirror again, as if at a TV screen where an exciting action movie was playing. Lena turned around abruptly and saw, fortunately there was not much dust here, that the jeep was standing on a bend, stuck into a tree, and cheerful streams of white steam were rising from the radiator. Max, are you crazy? She screamed with desperation in her voice. Maxim, who had returned to the salon, looked at her with an uncomprehending look. I didn't do anything. He himself seems to have overdone it. Ivan stopped. The guys got out of the car and stared at the hovering jeep, trying to figure out what was going on there. No one came out of the car. We have to go and see what's there. What if he needs help? Lena said and already took a step towards the wood. Lena, Maxim cautiously resisted her. Remember the drone? Maybe this one's hiding too, waiting for us to come over. And he's got a gun, for a minute. I might not make it. Lena was really late, but only for a minute. No, Max, we have to go. Otherwise, everything will be wrong. Ivan helped her. He looked into the pocket of his door and came back with a taser in his hand, which he handed to Elena. And then he seemed to be commanding. We go in from 3 sides. You, he looked at Lena, are in the back. Maxim is on the passenger side, and I am on his side. If he's really up to something, he won't track all three of them at once, he'll point a gun at me first, or he'll want to do something else. Maxim will try to stop him, and you Lena, he continued to address her as you. If everything goes wrong, try to immobilize him with a taser, preferably in the neck. He looked at everyone, as if looking for support. Let's go. The Jeep, which could now be seen in all its glory, was definitely not Russian, since neither Ivan, who considered himself an expert on cars, nor Maxim and Lena, had ever seen anything like it before. They approached him carefully, trying as quickly as possible to see what was happening in the cabin, which was hindered by the floating radiator. Lena and Ivan walked in a wide arc from the side of the grove, hiding behind the trees. Maxim was worse off. He was moving from the side of the field, and nothing was covering him. But he was the first to see that the driver of the Jeep was sitting with his head buried in the steering wheel, and was not making any attempts to get out of the wrecked car. Involuntarily, based on his inherent medical instincts, Maxim jerked towards the SUV, trying to help the victim, but was immediately stopped by Ivan. He abruptly raised his hand, attracting attention, and when he made sure that Max was looking at him, he shook his head negatively. The doctor sitting deep inside Maxim resigned himself, realizing that this was still the right decision. When everyone took their starting points, Ivan reached for the door handle, but Lena intervened. In the same way, she attracted attention with a wave of her hand, shook her head negatively and, hiding her hand in the sleeve of her camouflage, pretended to open the door with her sleeve, without touching the handle with her fingers. Ivan did just that. A man in camouflage's hand slipped limply from his knee, which was buried in the steering wheel, releasing the pistol, which fell to his feet on the mat next to a small pool of blood. The man behind the wheel went a little limp, but remained seated. He didn't show any attempts to get up, much less aggression. Whether there should be airbags in a military jeep, and if so, why they didn't work, was anyone's guess. Lena, already wearing thin rubber gloves of a poisonous blue color, silently shoved the stun gun at Ivan, who was no longer needed, and easily pushed it aside, indicating with her whole appearance that her work would continue. Neither Ivan Dioré nor Maxim saw where she kept the gloves and when she managed to pull them on. The first thing the revived investigator did was raise the pistol with his bent finger, grabbing the bracket, and carefully stretching his hand behind the victim's back, lowered him behind the back of the passenger seat. Only then did Lena lift the officer's head, and leaning him back, laid him on the back of the seat. The man was alive. Despite the fact that his eyes were closed and he did not react to the movement in any way, his chest rose and fell in time with his breathing. The victim's skin color did not turn blue, it was corporeal, only a little pale. There was a wide, 4 centimeters wide, half forehead wound with uneven edges, the result of a meeting between the head and the dashboard. The bleeding had almost stopped, with only isolated red drops rolling down onto his face, flooding his closed right eye and descending down his cheek to his chin, and even lower, dripping onto his camouflage. There was no need for silence anymore. I'm going to get a first aid kit. Ivan made a move towards his car, which Lena reacted sharply negatively to. No, there shouldn't be anything of ours here. No fingerprints, no fat, let alone bandages from our first aid kit. Let's take a look here. The first aid kit was found in the trunk, and a minute later Lena, not allowing Max to see the injured man, even though he was a doctor, but without gloves, carefully holding her head, tightly bandaged her bruised forehead. Then, with a piece of torn bandage, she wiped the blood from her face. That's where the victim seems to have regained consciousness. He unsuccessfully tried to open his eyes, then moved, wanted to take a deep breath but also unsuccessfully. It hurt him, and he gasped as he exhaled and stopped all movement, only croaking, "Thank you." The rescuers surrounding him, who had not expected such a quick awakening, shuddered. And then we experienced another shock. A hoarse voice suddenly rang out from an unnoticed radio in the passenger seat. "Seventh, answer the first, what do you have?" "Seventh." Lena reacted instantly. She shoved the grabbed walkie-talkie under Ivan's nose. "Say, first, we have an accident, come." And pressed the communication button. Ivan turned out to be a great guy. He reacted almost instantly, repeated everything word for word, and even added so much anguish of a seriously injured person to the words that Lena, smiling, gave a thumbs up. It was impossible to recognize a human being by that pained voice. After making sure that the officer at the wheel would wait for his colleagues without serious fear for his life, the guys, trying to dust as little as possible, quickly got out of this combat zone. I didn't want to appear in such a dusty car in the village. This was obvious and could cause unhealthy interest and relevant questions from the neighbors in the garage. And what fields were you driving through on such a wonderful Sunday afternoon, Ivan Alexeyevich, and not weekly? Therefore, Vanya, returning home, jumped into a small enclosed pond located to the side, which became it looks like a huge public car wash. The numerous footprints on the gentle slope leading directly to the shore suggested just that, but thank God there were no cars in sight. Before parting, when the battle-tested Hyundai took a place in the garage instead of Logan, Lena, a little worried, asked Ivan a question, the answer to which could change a lot. She liked Medvedev very much, especially for his foresight and thoughtfulness of actions, combined with the ability to instantly make decisions on sudden changes in already unusual situations. It seemed that he had gone through some kind of combat school, maybe even served in hotspots. She really didn't want to lose such an ally. But she couldn't involve, in general, an outsider, a family man without his consent in matters that would end in unknown consequences. She had no right. Today, she and Max asked Ivan to just show them a detour to the police station, and this trip ended with shooting, which frankly, she herself did not expect. Ivan Alexeyevich, you helped us a lot today, and if it hadn't been for your help, we don't know how it would have ended. Thank you, she began from afar. Ivan was silent, did not even make protesting gestures with his hands, as usually happens with such statements. They say that you are nothing. He pulled things out of the trunk and put them on the shelves at the back of the garage. Lena was silent for a while and decided to continue. But for us? She looked attentively at Max, who was nonchalantly looking at the garage. Everything is just beginning. We have seen that the ship is not a myth or a hoax. It really exists and holds a lot of secrets that we definitely need to solve. After all, for some reason this happened to us. So someone needs it. She added a phrase from Mayakovsky's poem to the spot. Of course, as we've seen, the ship is well guarded, keeping secrets from others, but we'll get there anyway. She said matter-of-factly. I'm sure. It will be much easier to do this with your help, but I can't even invite you to join us. You have a family, children, and a wife who is ill, and you saw for yourself how it can end today. However, all I would ask is that you let us know when the ship is excavated. Then we'll do it ourselves. Anyway, something will be noticeable. There will be conversations, rumors, unusual traffic movements. Maybe something will be exported. Of course, you don't need to climb the dump again. Security will be increased by an order of magnitude there now. We need to know the timing at least approximately, so as not to be late. Can you help us? Just with that? Lena paused. Take your time with the answer. Think about it, Ivan Alexeyevich. Ivan continued to go about his business, and it was hard to tell from his appearance whether he was thinking about anything Lena had said or ignoring her maxims. Having finished putting things neatly on the shelves, the garage owner turned to his partners with a serious, even stern face, and it became clear that he was ready to talk now. I'll help you, Elena Yurievna. He looked directly at her. Not even, to you, but to us. I'm not an adventurer, and having fun with shooting is not my type at all. I got a lot of that in the Second Chechen War. Lena mentally applauded herself. She thought that Ivan had served in hotspots somewhere. I realized that you and Max, he was already calling Maxim in a simple way that spoke of complete trust, are not adventurers. You immediately told me your story, which was hard to believe. I believed it. You have given me hope that my Lena can be cured. And I'm going to fight for that, even if I have to get shot at again. There was no bravado in his voice. He spoke simply like a man who had made an important decision for himself and was not going to back down from it. Max, who was standing silently in the doorway, turned away, looked outside and sniffed. However, he did not wipe his eyes. Elena was used to answering the phone, even if the caller wasn't listed in her contacts. The profession was obligatory. Even now, when she saw an unfamiliar number on the phone's display, she automatically swiped her finger across the screen. The voice sounded familiar, and a second later she realized it was Vanya Medvedev calling. My heart began to beat both joyfully and anxiously. What would he say? Elena Yurievna, good afternoon. This is Medvedev. Lena lost her head and answered quite unexpectedly, even for herself. Vanya, hello. Then I realized. I'm sorry. I am very glad to hear from you. Is there something new? Elena Yurievna. I'm at the autopsy. As if he hadn't noticed this treatment, he happily announced. Lena was silent, not understanding what it meant. At the autopsy. Ivan seemed to have guessed her predicament. I work there. I breed a breed. All of us, the machinists, bulldozers and belazists from the site, were kind of mobilized. On subscription. In general, we work as usual, but we bring the breed from there. He gave her a couple of seconds to comprehend the stunning news. We work around the clock. Our equipment, but if there is any damage, they fix everything immediately. I think at this rate we will reach the goal in 2 weeks. Lena was silent for a moment, then she started talking into the phone, as if she were talking to herself. So something didn't work out with them and the military builders. Maybe they didn't want to waste time. And the Stroibedov men are still shots. Then she returned to reality. Ivan Alexeyevich. You did a great job. This is very cool. But I ask you not to take unnecessary risks. Don't pay too much attention. She wondered what to call their common interest, finally found it as to the object. However, she paused again for a second to ask or not to ask, but nevertheless decided, if you can, very carefully, try to find out everything about the guards. Where, how much, after how long they change, how the posts are checked. Well, it's not for me to teach you, a military specialist. I ask you again, only if it works, and very, very carefully. Ivan spoke more calmly. Don't worry, Elena Yurievna. I understand everything and will do what I can. And what I can't do, I'll do. He muttered much more softly. I'll let you know as soon as the work is nearing completion. I'll be calling from someone else's phone again. Don't worry, I'll delete the contact immediately. After a couple more meaningless phrases, they said goodbye. Elena waited impatiently for the next call from Medvedev, and with each passing day her impatience increased. 10 days after the message about Ivan's work at the facility, an unfamiliar number appeared on the phone display again, but Lena already knew that it was him who was calling. I didn't think twice about how I knew, but I was sure and I wasn't mistaken. Elena Yurievna. Good afternoon. It's Medvedev. It's just like last time. Hello, Ivan Alexeyevich. She restrained her emotions. Thanks for calling. Any news? There is. There is news, Elena Yurievna. His voice was almost ringing with joy. You can't tell everything over the phone. We need to meet, talk it over. In a nutshell, the work is almost completed. The day after tomorrow, we are no longer called for a shift, because everything is as it is in the palm of your hand. Do you understand what I mean? Ivan, of course, knew that Lena would figure it out, but still couldn't resist, he clarified. Yes, I understand. We'll arrive on Saturday. Do you mind? No, of course not. Can I meet you at the same place in the park? Okay, about 12 o'clock. And they said goodbye again. Elena was almost jumping for joy. They were one step closer to probably solving the mysteries that had plagued her for more than 6 months. I should have shared this news with Maxim immediately. And suddenly Lena caught herself thinking that she knew Maxim was standing outside the door right now. That's right. There was the sound of a key turning in the lock, and Max himself appeared on the threshold of the apartment. Not to say that he also almost jumped for joy like his wife when he learned about the message from Krasnoozersk, but he felt a certain emotional uplift. Then he got a little sad, or rather, he wilted. To be honest, if it weren't for his promise to help his wife in everything after losing an argument about a spaceship, he would have preferred to just stay at home, mess with Alyosha, or walk with him and Lena's mom through the evening streets. Instead, you have to use a turnip to climb mountain dumps resembling Elbrus, drive a car through fields where dust obscures the sun and bullets whistle in your ear like mosquitoes in the evening heat. Then I thought about it and decided, it's still better than the glowing dead. Then he didn't know anything and really panicked. If it wasn't for Elena. Now it's his turn. He's her only protector. She has no protection measure. Now there will definitely be a new round of adventures, and God only knows how it will end. But he will try. Lena was thoughtful all evening, and even answered Alyosha's questions late or out of place. But Maxim was fully loaded. He was both an elephant and a steam locomotive, a foreman at a construction site run by his son, a helmsman on a ship commanded by a 4-year-old captain, and many others. When it was time for bedtime, and Alyosha, fed and washed, went to the nursery, Maxim himself was ready to lie down right on the floor. But that was not the case. Max, have you tried to just put a person to sleep? Not to send over the fence. For some reason this phrase stuck with them and was repeated quite often, not to cause seizures or nosebleeds, but just to put them to sleep for a while. Maxim thought about it. He realized that Lena was looking for ways to enter the construction site, where the excavated ship was located without unnecessary loss of life, and wanted to use his, Max's, abilities. Well, putting him to sleep was certainly better than anything he'd done before. I haven't tried it, Maxim said thoughtfully. I thought that I could only cause some pathological processes in people. You said so yourself about my anti-medical abilities. But sleep is still a physiological process. Try it on me now, she enthused. Maxim smiled and shook his head negatively, but Lena wasn't used to backing down. After about 5 minutes, he gave up, but he staged his attempt like a magician does his act. He made passes with his hands, whispered some incomprehensible words, Made hilarious or stern grimaces, nothing changed. Unless Elena just laughed. Max, let's be serious. Try again. Maxim tried and failed. His wife, who hid a smile, did not fall asleep, although Maxim himself was ready to collapse on the bed at any moment and had no doubt that he would fall asleep immediately. Waving his hand with his wife's gracious consent to experiments on hypersomnia, Maxim went to the bathroom, and Lena plunged into the internet. Splashing around in the bathroom, Max was about to head to the bedroom, but was stopped literally at the door by his wife's very sarcastic voice. Tell me, dear doctor, is there no other physiological sleep? Maxim, who had no time to hide, had to answer. Yes, there are probably some types of pathological sleep, but to be honest, I don't remember. No, I remember. He pointedly raised his index finger up and told me a great secret. Sleepwalking. Sleeping is different, he finished modestly. No, Max, I didn't guess. That's not it at all. Lena shook her finger negatively now. Have you forgotten about narcolepsy, or about a lethargic dream? This is pure pathology. Maxim remembered about the lethargic sleep. Or rather, he remembered now, when his wife, who was surfing the net, refreshed his memory. With a mild form, it's even better. A man sleeps, and you can't wake him up from a cannon, but with a severe one. This is something similar to death. The pupils do not react to light, the body of the person who has fallen asleep is pale and cold, the pulse rate is less than a dozen beats per minute and there is practically no breathing. It happened that such sufferers were buried. Especially earlier, he read. But I couldn't remember what narcolepsy was, for the life of me. I had to go online too. When they compared the two diseases, they decided that lethargy, of course, was better for the realization of their plans, only in a mild form. It was a small matter to check whether Max could put unfriendly and unfriendly guys to sleep. He definitely won't make the good ones sleep, there's no need for that. Max's abilities were tested much faster than Lena could reach the bathroom. She suddenly froze, not even having time to lower her raised hand, and just stood there, as if listening to something. Maxim stared at her in utter bewilderment, but he was in no hurry to clarify anything. He also listened to what was going on around him, but apart from Alyosha's snoring and the refrigerator working in the kitchen, he heard nothing. Max, Lena asked cautiously, without changing her position, have Katya and Valera returned yet? Katya and Valera Petrova, a married couple the same age as Lena and Max, lived in the apartment opposite. The guys had good relations with the neighbors. Sometimes, in case of an emergency, when Grandma was busy, Alyosha stayed with them. A week ago they went to Altai, to the Salt Lake to relax and get medical treatment and maybe finally have a baby. In any case, they sincerely believed in this, preferring all sorts of folk methods of combating this disease to traditional medicine. They're supposed to be back at the end of the week, Maxim replied, recalling a conversation when a neighbor asked him to keep an eye on the apartment during their absence. Max, Elena continued in her usual tone, lowering her hand, we have a problem. Someone is trying to get into their apartment. Taking off her slippers, carefully, on tiptoe, trying not to accidentally catch anything, Lena went to the front door and lifted the curtain of the peephole. Her senses did not let her down again. A man in medical rubber gloves and with a backpack on his back sat down at the door of a neighbor's apartment, who was trying to open the lock with a skeleton key. Lena was well versed in such subtleties by the nature of her profession. Just as carefully, she returned to the room. Max, there's a burglar in there. He's trying to get into the Petrov apartment. Somehow he knows they're not there. She paused, gathering her thoughts. If only the lights on the landing were turned off, or the eyes in the other doors were sealed. Some kind of non-scary, or stupid, she said to Maxim, then gave an introduction. Go to the door, just be careful and try to put him to sleep. Just be careful, she said again. If it doesn't work out, step back just as carefully so as not to scare it off. I'll call the band then. Max was far from even a novice operative, so by the time he got to the door, he almost ruined the whole thing. Either he rested his forehead against the door, trying to look through the peephole, or he touched the door handle. Trying to rest, but the burglar suddenly turned around and stared straight into the peephole, where Maxim was looking from the other side. It seemed like a moment and he would disappear, rush down the stairs, but Max did not give him that moment. The man suddenly went limp, then somehow awkwardly leaned his shoulder against the door, next to which he sat down, and soon he fell onto the concrete floor of the landing, even slightly bumping his head. Maxim watched him for a full minute, but he didn't even move. Looking victorious, Max returned to the room, made an inviting gesture with his hands, which he reinforced with words. Get it? Delighted, Lena first looked through the peephole. When she was sure that the would-be burglar was lying quietly and not moving, she went out onto the playground. In front of her lay a relatively young man, dressed quite decently, wearing stretched medical gloves, and holding in his hand the simplest lockpick in the form of a hook made of strong steel wire with one end flattened. This left no doubt about the deceased's profession or his intentions. He was breathing calmly and really gave the impression of a sound sleeper, despite the fact that his posture was not entirely comfortable. His bent legs looked unnaturally to one side, and his body and head were turned to the other. Elena tried to rouse the lying villain, even looked into his eyes, lifting an eyelid, but to no avail. "It's no use," Max stated, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed over his chest, looking like Napoleon. "You can't wake him up right now, even if you shoot a cannon. And no one knows when he will wake up. But when he wakes up, there will be a surprise for him in the cell," he tried to joke. Returning home, Lena strictly ordered Maxim to keep quiet about his involvement in the unfortunate loser's dream. The story she suggested looked like this. They stayed up late and suddenly heard the sound of a body falling on the landing outside the door. They looked out and there was a man lying there, and they came out alive, like he was sleeping and not waking up, and then they saw a skeleton key in his hand. So they called the squad. "We have no idea why he fell. Maybe a stroke." The poor guy was worried. Robbing apartments is a serious matter, strong nerves are needed here. The pressure went up, and, yeah. The eldest of the operatives of the newly arrived squad turned out to be Elena's acquaintance from some past cases, and the version proposed to her was accepted quite adequately. However, the captain called an ambulance to make sure he didn't really have a stroke, which took the soundly sleeping burglar somewhere to his penates. Already falling asleep, Maxim woke up and asked his wife a question that suddenly occurred to him. "Lena, how did you know that someone else was at the neighbor's apartment and wanted to get in there?" She was silent for a while, analyzing the situation, as she almost always did when she didn't know the obvious answer to a question, then answered. "Max, you're going to laugh, but I seem to have a gift, just like you. Only different. The gift of foresight, I would call it that. I saw another picture in the light show. You saw the light, I saw the smoke. So we have different abilities." Then she told me about her anticipation of Medvedev's call, and that she knew when Max himself was standing outside the door, but then she just realized that someone else was on the landing and his thoughts were unkind. For another hour, the guys discussed the possibilities opening up before them in the light of Lena's new abilities and Max's almost instantaneous ability to put people to sleep. This is much better than the previous protection measures. Although how would you look at it? Would he try to put the driver of the jeep chasing them to sleep? How would it end? So you still have to think. Hoping that their new abilities would help them finally figure out and solve the mysteries of the alien spaceship that had already been released from captivity, they fell asleep.